There is a clay tablet in a museum drawer that historians dismissed for almost a century as a grain receipt. Routine bookkeeping, nothing worth translating twice. But hidden inside its repeated symbols, names, and measurements is something nobody expected to find on a piece of administrative clay. Evidence of a system, a network that governed labour, food, temples, taxation, and trade across entire cities, 4,000 years before anyone thought such coordination was possible. The tablet was never a receipt. It was a node in a machine. What happens when you finally read it for exactly what it actually records? The story begins not with a discovery, but with a flood. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, archaeologists working in southern Iraq began pulling clay tablets out of the ground in numbers no one was prepared for. Not dozens, not hundreds, hundreds of thousands. The mounds of ancient cities like Ur, Uruk, Nippur, and Girsu turned out to be filled with them, layer after layer of baked and unbaked clay covered in the wedge-shaped script we call Cuneiform. The excavators had come looking for the origins of the Bible, for the palaces of kings, for the great epics. What they found, overwhelmingly, was paperwork. That word is not an exaggeration. When the tablets began to be translated, the vast majority of them turned out to be records. Deliveries of barley, allotments of wool, counts of sheep and goats, lists of workers, receipts, ledgers, inventories, accounts. The scholars of that era, trained on Homer and scripture, were openly disappointed. They had hoped for the voices of gods and heroes. They got the voice of an accountant. And so a sorting process began, quietly, without anyone ever formally deciding it. Tablets bearing myths, hymns, and royal inscriptions were translated, published, and celebrated. Tablets bearing numbers and commodities were catalogued, labelled, and put away. The label most of them received was some variation of a single phrase: administrative record, routine. One of those tablets is the subject of this story. It is small enough to fit in the palm of your hand, which is not an accident, because it was designed to be held. Its surface carries a few dozen lines of compressed cuneiform. When it was first examined, a scholar read it quickly, noted its contents, and moved on. The contents seemed almost aggressively unremarkable. A quantity of barley expressed in a unit of measure. A name, a title, a month, a year formula, another quantity, another name. An impression pressed into the clay by a small carved cylinder, rolled across the surface while it was still wet. The tablet was recording that a specific amount of grain had moved from one point to another, under the authority of a specific person at a specific time. A receipt. That was the assessment, and by the standards of the time, it was not wrong. But consider what that assessment quietly assumed. It assumed that a receipt is a trivial thing. It assumed that recording a transaction is a simple act that any society stumbles into naturally. It assumed that the interesting history was elsewhere, in temples and battles, and that the clay in the drawers was background noise. For decades, almost nobody questioned those assumptions. The tablets sat in museum storage in London, Berlin, Philadelphia, and Istanbul. Tens of thousands of them never read even once. The field had effectively decided that the most common category of evidence from the world's first civilization was not worth looking at. Then slowly, a different kind of scholar began to look. Not for stories, but for patterns. And the patterns were there, sitting in plain sight, exactly where no one had bothered to check. The first anomaly was repetition. The tablet at the centre of this story does not use casual language. It uses formulas. The same phrases, in the same order, with the same grammatical structures, appear on it that appear on thousands of other administrative tablets. The date is expressed in a standardised year formula. A phrase naming a major event of the reigning king, identical in form across documents. The commodity is expressed in standardised units, the gur of barley, the salare of oil, units with fixed relationships to one another. The personnel are identified by name and by function, receiver, overseer, conveyor, in consistent terminology. None of this is how a person jots down a note, it is how a system fills out a form. Repetition within one archive might mean nothing more than local habit. A single temple, a single scribe school, a single city developing its own conventions. That would be unremarkable. What researchers found when they began comparing tablets across sites was something else. The same formulas, the same units, the same administrative vocabulary appeared on tablets excavated from different cities, separated by more than 100 kilometers of river plain, written by different scribes who had never met. A tablet from Girsu and a tablet from Umma and a tablet from the great administrative centre at Puzrish-Dagan near Nippur could be laid side by side and read with the same key. Same measures, same phrasing, same structure, same silent grammar underneath the ink of wet clay. Scholars had called it bookkeeping. But consider what bookkeeping actually requires. It requires a shared writing system, taught the same way in different places. It requires standardized units of measure, which means somebody defined them and somebody enforced them. It requires a calendar that multiple cities agree on, so that a date written in one place means the same thing in another. It requires trained personnel, which means schools. It requires accountability, which means a mechanism for verifying who authorized what. A receipt is not a trivial object. A receipt is the visible tip of an invisible institution. And this is where the small cylinder impression on the tablet's surface becomes important. That rolled image was not decoration. It was a seal, the personal mark of an official functioning exactly like a signature. Its presence on the tablet means the transaction was authorized, and it means someone, somewhere expected to check. You do not authenticate documents unless documents can be audited. You do not audit unless there is an organization above the individual scribe. The seal implies the auditor. The auditor implies the institution. The institution implies something that the word receipt was never going to capture. This is what the tablets actually record before any interpretation is added. Standardized script, standardized measures, standardized dates, authenticated authorization, matching conventions across multiple independent cities. Every one of those facts sits physically in the clay, visible to anyone who takes the drawer out and reads what is there. None of it is speculation. The speculation, if you can even call it that, begins with a single question. Standardization does not happen by accident. Somebody standardized this. Somebody decided what a gur of barley was and made that decision hold across a landscape of rival cities. Somebody built the training, the vocabulary, the calendar, the chain of authorization. The tablet in the drawer was never the artifact. The tablet was the output. The artifact is the thing that produced it. The thing that could generate identical documents in city after city, year after year, without breaking form. For most of a century, that thing had no name, because nobody was looking for it. The label on the drawer said routine. The clay said otherwise. It had been saying otherwise the entire time. The turning point came when researchers stopped reading tablets one at a time and started reading them as populations. A single tablet is an anecdote. 10,000 tablets are a dataset, and the period that produced the densest dataset of all is the one scholars call the Third Dynasty of Ur, or Ur-3, roughly 2100 to 2000 BCE. From that single century, more than 90,000 administrative tablets have been published, with untold thousands more still sitting unread in storage. The tablet in our drawer belongs to that world. When researchers began cross-referencing it against its siblings from other archives, the pattern did not merely hold, it deepened. Start with the rations. Across tablets from Girsu, Umma, Ur and Nippur, workers are recorded as receiving allotments of barley, oil and wool. The quantities are not random, they repeat. An adult male labourer appears again and again receiving the same standard monthly measure of barley. Women appear with a different standard measure, children with another, supervisors with more. The amounts are graded by category, and the categories are consistent from one city to the next, as if every administrator in the land was working from the same table of values. Read one ration list and you have read the logic of hundreds. This is what the tablets record. And a standardized ration is a strange thing to find, because it means labour itself had been quantified. A worker was not just a person. A worker was a defined input with a defined cost, calculated in grain per month, and the calculation was portable across an entire civilization. Then look at where the goods were flowing and something even stranger appears. Among the Ur-3 tablets, researchers identified a system that scholars now call the bala, a Sumerian word often translated as rotation or exchange. The tablets record that each major province was obligated to contribute goods, livestock, grain, labour to central collection points, and that these obligations rotated on a schedule. One province's turn came in 1 month, another province's turn in the next. The contributions were logged, credited, and balanced against withdrawals. A province that delivered more than its obligation carried a credit. A province that fell short carried a recorded debt. That structure has a modern name, and archaeologists do not hesitate to use it. It was a taxation system operating on a fiscal calendar with provincial accounts. Sit with what that means. Taxation is often imagined as something crude in the ancient world, soldiers arriving to take what they can carry. The tablets describe nothing of the kind. They describe scheduled, predictable, recorded obligations distributed across provinces according to their capacity, tracked in writing and reconciled centrally, not plunder. Accounting. The centre did not merely take, the centre kept books. One site above all made this visible. Near Nippur, at a place the Sumerians called Puzrish-Dagan, and archaeologists called Drahem, excavations and the antiquities market surfaced thousands of tablets from what turned out to be a state livestock depot, founded under King Shulgi around 2050 BCE. The tablets from Drahem record animals arriving from the provinces by the tens of thousands, sheep, goats, oxen being counted, categorized and redistributed, to temples for offerings, to the court, to officials to feed the system's own personnel. Individual animals are tracked as they enter and leave. Daily intake was logged. Monthly summaries were compiled from the daily records. Yearly summaries were compiled from the monthly ones. There are tablets that are nothing but audits of other tablets. The administration was not only recording the world, it was recording itself, and every layer of it was authenticated. This is where the cylinder seals stop being decoration and become the key to the whole structure. Thousands of these small carved stones survive, each engraved with a unique scene and frequently an inscription naming its owner and the owner's office. When an official authorized a transaction, the seal was rolled across the wet clay, leaving a repeating impression that functioned as a signature. The tablets record who sealed what. Some documents carry the seal of the receiving official, some the seal of the conveying official, and the sealing conventions themselves follow rules. Scholars have reconstructed chains of responsibility from seal impressions alone. This official answered to that one. This office fed into that one. Forging a seal was possible, and the system knew it, which is precisely why seals were personal, registered by inscription, and tied to specific offices. Authentication only exists where accountability is expected. Accountability only exists where someone above you can demand the record. Now, assemble the pieces, exactly as the clay presents them. Standardized script, taught in scribal schools whose exercise tablets we have also found. Standardized measures, fixed in ratio and shared across cities. Standardized ration scales, grading human labour into defined categories. A rotating provincial contribution schedule reconciled like a ledger. A central depot processing tens of thousands of animals with daily, monthly and yearly summaries. Personal seals binding every movement of goods to a named, accountable official. Each of these facts, individually, was known for decades. Each was filed under routine. It was only when they were placed side by side that the outline of the larger object became visible. Here is the reveal that changes how you see the tablet in the drawer. That tablet is not a record of an event. It is a component of a mechanism. Every formula on its surface exists because a distant office needed to be able to read it without ambiguity. Every measure it cites exists because a conversion table somewhere defined it. Every seal impression it carries exists because an auditor might one day pull it and check. The tablet was written not for the two people involved in the transaction, but for the system above them both. It is, in the most literal sense available to us, one node in a network. And a network is not a metaphor here. The tablets physically reference each other. A delivery logged at Drahem corresponds to an obligation logged in a provincial account. A withdrawal recorded in one archive appears as a receipt in another. Researchers matching tablets across modern museum collections, pieces scattered between London, Istanbul and Philadelphia, have reconnected documents that were once two ends of a single transaction, separated for 4,000 years and reunited by their matching entries. The bookkeeping balances, across cities, across decades. Scholars once assumed that complexity of this kind belonged to much later empires. The clay says it was already running before 2000 BCE. A protocol implies a system. A system implies designers. The tablets name their kings, Namu Shulgi, and credit them with reforms of weights and measures. The design, in other words, was deliberate. Someone built this. The next question is what exactly they built it to do. The answer is larger than taxation. The answer is everything. Zoom out from the single tablet now all the way out until you are looking at the entire landscape of southern Mesopotamia around 2050 BCE. What the accumulated tablets describe when read together is not a taxation scheme with some record-keeping attached. It is a full administrative stack, reaching into nearly every category of organised life. Take the categories one at a time and watch each one turn out to be larger than the last. Begin with labour. The tablets record work gangs, organised under named foremen, assigned to specific tasks: digging canals, hauling grain, harvesting fields, towing boats. The records do not merely note that work happened, they quantify it. Tasks were measured in standardised workday units, and scribes calculated expected output in advance. So much earth moved per worker per day, so much grain milled, so much cloth woven. Actual performance was logged against the expectation. There are tablets recording workers listed as sick, workers listed as absent, workers listed as deceased, each notation affecting the balance of the account. Some accounts track a foreman's obligations across an entire year, and when the year's labour fell short of the projection, the deficit was carried forward against him. Archaeologists have found accounts where a foreman died in deficit and the debt was settled from his estate. That is on the tablets. A managed workforce with performance targets, attendance records and liabilities. 4,000 years ago. Now food. The ration lists already showed that grain moved to workers in standardised allotments. The wider archive shows the other end of the pipeline. Fields are recorded by size, by expected yield, by actual harvest. Plough teams are inventoried, down to the oxen and the seed grain issued to each team. Granaries log intake and outflow. Milling establishments, some employing hundreds of women whose names and rations appear in the records, converted grain to flour, and the conversion rates were themselves standardised and audited. The system did not just distribute food, it planned food, projecting yields, allocating seed, moving surplus between cities by boat, and recording the boat, the crew and the cargo while doing it. The temples sit at the centre of much of this, and here the old assumptions inverted completely. Early scholars imagined Sumerian temples as purely spiritual places, houses of worship with economic activity as a sideline. The tablets describe institutions that owned fields, herds, workshops, and labour forces, institutions that functioned as economic engines, collecting, storing, processing, and redistributing enormous quantities of goods. Offerings arriving for the gods were logged with the same precision as tax deliveries because administratively they flowed through the same machinery. A sheep delivered to the temple of Enlil at Nippur passed through the same counting, sealing and recording apparatus as a sheep delivered to the crown. The sacred and the fiscal ran on one protocol, then trade and communication, which is where the system's reach becomes genuinely difficult to dismiss. The tablets record merchants, given silver or goods on account, travelling beyond Sumer and returning with copper, tin, precious stones and timber, their transactions balanced in accounts that convert everything into common units of silver or barley. Balanced accounts, with debits and credits reconciled, appear across the archives, and binding it all together were the couriers. Tablets record messengers moving between cities, and other tablets record the provisions issued to them at the way stations, bread, beer, oil, measured, and logged at each stop. Some scholars describe this as evidence of an organised messenger service operating along the road system, with standardised provisioning, which means information itself was flowing through the network on a schedule, carried by personnel the system fed, tracked and accounted for. Pause here because the honest distinction matters, and this is where this story separates itself from wishful thinking. Everything listed so far, the ration scales, the labour accounts, the sick lists, the bala rotation, the Draham livestock counts, the merchant balances, the messenger provisions, is directly attested. These are things the tablets record physically, legibly, in archives you can consult today. What is interpretation is the connective tissue, the degree of central planning behind it all. Some archaeologists read the Earth-3 state as a command economy, centrally directed from the top. Others argue the tablets overrepresent the state's sector, because institutions write things down and households mostly do not, and that a private economy thrived alongside the bureaucracy, underdocumented and largely invisible to us. That debate is real and unresolved. But notice what both sides concede. Nobody disputes that the administrative machinery existed, that it spanned multiple cities, that it was standardized, scheduled, audited, and authenticated. The argument is only about how much of life it touched. The machine itself is not in question, so follow the chain one link at a time. If the measures were standard across cities, then some authority defined them, and the tablets say one did, crediting King Ur-Nammu and his successor Shulgi with reforming weights and measures across the realm. If the schedules were shared, then the cities were synchronized, and the bala rotation shows they were, month by month, province by province. If the records were audited, then the network had memory, and the yearly summary tablets compiled from monthly summaries compiled from daily logs show that memory reaching back across years. And if a single authority could define, synchronize, and remember across an entire river plain, then the word for what the Sumerians built is not bookkeeping. The word is infrastructure, not roads and walls, though they had those too, but administrative infrastructure, invisible, procedural, made of trained scribes, fixed units, fiscal calendars, sealing conventions, and archives. A civilization does not run on grain. It runs on the coordination of grain. The tablets are what coordination looks like when it fossilizes. Here is the peak of it, the sentence the entire archive has been building toward. What looked like clay receipts turns out to be the operating system of a civilization, the earliest one we can read, preserved not in monuments but in tens of thousands of small, palm-sized documents that scholars spent a century filing under routine. Every dismissed tablet was a line of code. The drawers were full of source, and the error in the end was never in the clay. The error was in a single modern word: primitive. Generations of readers looked at the world's first civilization and assumed that whatever they found there must be simple, because it was early. The tablets record the opposite. They record scheduling, standardization, auditing, quality control, personnel management, and multi-city logistics, executed with a consistency that would be recognizable to any modern administrator. The people who wrote them were not fumbling toward organization. They had organization. The question that remains, the one the final tablet in the drawer forces on us, is how they got it so early, with so little visible precedent. That question is where this story has been heading from the first line, return to the drawer. The same tablet is still there, the same few dozen lines of cuneiform, the same seal impression rolled across the clay 4,000 years ago by a hand that expected to be audited. Nothing about the object has changed. Everything about what it means has. It is no longer a receipt. It is a surviving fragment of the oldest administrative network the human species is known to have built. And that leaves one question standing, the one this entire investigation has been circling. How did a system this complete appear this early? There are two honest readings, and they deserve to be stated fairly, because the evidence supports parts of both. The first reading is gradual development, and it has real weight behind it. The Ur-3 bureaucracy did not fall from the sky. Before it, around 2300 BCE, the Akkadian Empire of Sargon ran its own multi-city administration. Before that, the archaic tablets of Uruk, dating to roughly 3200 BCE, already record commodities, quantities and officials in a script so early it is barely writing at all. Before writing itself, there were clay tokens, small geometric counters that archaeologists have recovered across the Near East in layers stretching back thousands of years. Tokens that many scholars argue were the precursors of the first written numbers. Read this way, the system in the drawer is the top of a very long staircase. Step by step, over more than 1,000 years, counting became tokens, tokens became impressions, impressions became script, script became accounting, and accounting became a state. Nothing supernatural, just accumulation. The second reading does not deny the staircase. It asks why the staircase exists at all, and why it climbs so fast. Because even granting every precursor, the compression is startling. The distance between the first crude commodity lists at Uruk and the fully audited, multi-city, fiscally scheduled machinery of Ur-3 is roughly 1,000 years. 1,000 years sounds long until you compare it against the timescale on which humans had lived before it. Hundreds of thousands of years without writing, without cities, without administration of any kind. Then, in one narrow corridor of river plain, in what is geologically an instant, our species goes from counting sheep with pebbles to running provincial tax rotations with year-end audits. The gradualist can describe each step. What no one has fully explained is the acceleration, why here, why then, why so completely, and why the surrounding world took centuries more to catch up. That is not a fringe observation. It is an open problem, phrased politely in the literature as the question of the origins of state complexity. Both readings, notice, stand on the same tablets. The evidence is not in dispute, the meaning is. And that is exactly where this story has to leave the debate, because the tablets themselves refuse to resolve it. They record the system running, they do not record who first imagined it. But they do record something else, almost as an accident. And it may be the most consequential fact in this entire story. Writing itself, the technology this sentence is made of, was not invented for stories. The earliest tablets we possess are not prayers, not poems, not the names of kings, they are accounts. Quantities of grain, counts of livestock, rations owed and rations paid. The overwhelming consensus of scholars who study the origins of cuneiform is that writing emerged from administration, from the need to track goods and obligations beyond the limits of human memory. Literature came later, riding on infrastructure built for bookkeeping. The epics, the hymns, the myths that the early excavators were so desperate to find were only possible because someone first needed to prove that a shipment of barley had arrived. Every word ever written descends from a receipt. Sit with that, because it reaches further than Sumer. The instinct that dismissed these tablets, the assumption that administration is boring, that the real story is elsewhere, is the same instinct that misses the machinery of the present. You live inside a descendant of this system, the tax schedule that structures your year, the identification numbers that define you to institutions, the audits, the standardized measures, the signatures, the databases that remember your obligations longer than any human could. None of it is new. It is the bala rotation running at scale. The scribes changed, the clay became silicon, the protocol survived, and like the workers on the rationalists, most people live their entire lives inside the system without ever once looking directly at it. The Sumerians looked at it. That may be their most underrated achievement. They did not merely build administration, they made it visible, durable, and legible, pressing it into a medium that outlasted their language, their cities, and their gods. Empires that came later wrote on perishable things and vanished into rumour. The Sumerians wrote on mud, and mud, fired by time and accident, turned out to be one of the most permanent recording media ever used. The tablets survived burial, flood, conquest, and a century of scholarly indifference. They are still legible. The system they describe can still be reconstructed, transaction by transaction, seal by seal, by anyone patient enough to read what is actually there. Most people will never do that. Most people will pass the displayed case, glance at the small brown object behind the glass, read the label that still says administrative record, and move on to the gold in the next room. A few will stop. Fewer still will understand that the unremarkable object in front of them is the earliest surviving evidence of humanity organising itself at scale. The moment our species learned to coordinate strangers across distances no single voice could reach. The tablet does not care which kind of visitor you are. It was not written for visitors, it was written for the system, for an auditor who has been dead for 4,000 years, and it is still waiting, formally correct, properly sealed, ready for inspection. So the question this story leaves you with is not whether the Sumerians were more sophisticated than we assumed. The clay has settled that. The question is the one the drawer has been asking all along, quietly, for a century. If the foundation of civilization was not the sword, and not the temple, but the ledger, the shared, trusted, audited record that let strangers cooperate, then somewhere near the beginning of history, someone understood that power flows to whoever keeps the books. The tablets record the system, They never record who saw it first. Somewhere in the drawers, unread, that answer may still be waiting.